Let's jump to chapter 3. In chapter 2 in Exodus, though we can mention a little bit here, that in chapter 2, God started the process of the Exodus. It was started by the birth of Moses. Okay, that's chapter 2. Now, this is an amazing story that in spite of the command of Pharaoh to kill all the babies, well, not all the babies, but all the boys, the midwives resisted, and the Lord blessed them. Here, the mother of Moses, or I would say the parents of Moses, when he was born, he doesn't look like an ordinary child. One translation says he looks like somebody whose God's hand is on. Okay, and so the parents of Moses decided, especially the mother, to disobey Pharaoh, and said, "We will not kill the baby," and in the process, put him in a basket, let him float in the Nile. And the person who saved Moses was a daughter of Pharaoh. Now, I know that the event happening in Egypt, in Goshen especially, is tragic because killing all the male boys. But can you imagine God using Pharaoh's daughter to save Moses? So those are some of the things. And then he grew up, and I don't know, maybe he looked different than the Egyptian, I would assume that. And by the way, the mother started being paid for babysitting, So she was well taken care of. This is God's sense of humor, I guess, although it's not that obvious. But then Moses grew up, and he saw one of the Egyptian beating up a Jew. And so he killed the Egyptian. And then he looked around, nobody is looking. He decided to bury the guy in the sand. Well, it was discovered later, so obviously somebody was looking, and the one who was looking was a fellow Jew. Now, this is the tragedy of the faith community. Your greatest enemy will always be the one coming from the inside, not from the outside. Okay? So here's a fellow Jew delivering another fellow Jew, and this guy decided to say, "You want me to tell on Pharaoh?" And so Moses, out of fear, ran. So forget those Ten Commandments stories of Cecil DeMille and the new ones wherein he was arrested. No, it's not in the Bible. He just scared stiff. And Moses ran and went east and went to the plains of Midian for 40 years. So Moses was around 40 years old when God called him, or when he decided to kill this Egyptian. And it took another 40 years for him to be in the wilderness. We'll see why 40. They say 40 years is the Jewish length of a generation. Well, you can prove that biblically. But then, we'll see more lessons about that. We'll just call the teaching tonight as Encounters of Change. Okay, Encounters of Change. So let's go to Exodus chapter 3, the whole chapter, starting on verse 1. Meanwhile, so he was already in Midian. Meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Jethro. I want you to underline that word, shepherding. That's a very important word. Shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire within a bush. Question, who is the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament? The pre-incarnate Christ. Okay, the pre-incarnate Christ. As Moses looked, he saw that the bush was on fire, but was not consumed. So Moses thought, "I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Isn't it the bush burning up?" When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to him from the bush, "Moses, Moses." "Here I am," he answered. "Do not come closer," he said. "Remove the sandals of your feet from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy ground." Then he continued, "I am the Lord, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt, and have heard them crying out because of their oppressors. I know about their sufferings, and have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them from the land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the territory of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. So because the Israelites' cry for help has come to me, I have also seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore go, I am sending you to Pharaoh, so that you may lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses asked God, who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He answered, I will certainly be with you, and this will be the sign to you that I am the one who sent you when you bring the people out of Egypt. You will all worship God at this mountain. Then Moses asked God, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered in every generation. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I have paid close attention to you and to what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised you that I will bring you up from the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. They will listen to what you say. Then you, along with the elders of Israel, must go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now, please, let us go on a 3-day trip in the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. However, I know that the king of Egypt will not allow you to go, even under force from a strong hand. But when I stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles and will perform in it, after that he will let you go. And I will give these people such favor with the Egyptians that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. Each woman will ask her neighbor and any woman is staying in her house for silver and gold, jewelry and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters, so you will plunder the Egyptians. Okay, now in chapter 2, Moses tried to be the deliverer. He failed. Okay, he ran away. So in this story, first of all, let's talk about the deliverer who meets the deliverer. Okay, Moses meeting the real deliverer. Before one can help those who are drowning, it is said, first he needs to learn how to swim. Otherwise, both of them will drown. Moses, perhaps because he grew in the palace area, thought he was different from the Jews. Well, he was educated in the Egyptian university, so he thinks differently of himself. But this is where a person is a rough stone and can't be used by God. In this section, we will see that Moses actually was the first one who needed deliverance. What is that noise? Oh, because it's open. Yeah. It's not closed yet. Okay, so I was wondering why it's so noisy. Saan ba tayo? Well, he needs deliverance. You know, you have to recognize that as people of God, no matter what good news we bring to the people, we are the first ones who actually needs this deliverance. He needs to be delivered, number one, from being raised as an Egyptian to a fellow Hebrew. Now, he was raised for 40 years in the Egyptian household. If you are raised for 40 years in the Egyptian household, you think like an Egyptian. Okay? Just look at the Filipinos coming from the Philippines. They are 100% Filipinos. When they are in the Philippines, they come here, they become Americans right away. I mean, faster than anything else. So he may have the complexion, the looks of an Israeli, but actually he was raised as an Egyptian. You know, it took another 40 years, I believe, for God to get it out of his system. Now, this is what we call today as the renewing of the mind. Not because a person got born again means everything is changed. Well, the spirit is renewed, but the way we think is still the same. You know, the way we process things, it's still the same. And so Moses, that's why he took arms and killed the Egyptian. That's how the Egyptians will do it. But that is not God's method. Look, it's Moses already, but it took God 40 years to take Egypt out of his system. That's why when Moses returned to Egypt, there was no trace of Egypt. And amazingly, within that 40 years, when Israel left Egypt, they have all the trace of Egypt. So the exact opposite. He needs to be delivered also from depending on his own strength and wits to bring deliverance to the people, you know. And this is a tendency that all of us have. It is very difficult to look up to God while we are looking up to ourselves and to fellow human beings. Even in terms of provisions. If you believe God for provisions, sometimes we have a backup plan. Our family, our friends. So we say we're believing God, but actually we have a backup plan. What will you do if there's no backup plan? Okay? So Moses has to learn, because the people will abandon him. The people will resist him at times. He needs to learn that his only source of strength is God. And also, Moses needs to be delivered from fear. So these are the three things that Moses needs deliverance from. We know that after he killed the Egyptians, he ran right away. At the end of chapter 1, God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God also saw the Israelites, and God knew. Now, knew here is an interesting word because God knew what's happening to the people. The Bible says that it was the rise of the new Pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph. Same word. The Pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph started the persecution which led to the deliverance of Israel whom God knew. Okay? There's a play of word here that you can see if you will read carefully. Pharaoh thought he knew the Israelites. Remember last week? If a war break out, they will side with the enemy. He really thought. Now this supposed human knowledge, kings are like that. A lot of kings are operating in fear. That's why in the ancient time, kings kill a lot of people out of suspicion. Okay? And so some kings will kill their own children. The moment they find out their children is out of line, they'll just kill them. They'll kill their brothers. Among the monarchs, it's very common that brothers kill each other, especially when they are vying for the crown. Very common in the royal family. Why? Because they are all possessed by fear. And so Moses was already delivered from that, but we learned last week that Pharaoh was actually very afraid. That's why he started persecuting the Israelites. So, a deliverer also needs a lesson and training in humility. So these are the necessary things why Moses needs to meet God. He needs a lesson and training in humility. If you can deliver people, pride can really go up your head, you know. Just listen to our presidential campaign. You know, you watch the speech of Trump. The only thing that he's not saying is he's God, you know. The way he talks, I brought these jobs, I did all of this. That's politics. They really lift their own chair. Now, granted that he was able to accomplish a lot of these things, but they can't help it. You listen to him talk, and any politicians, there is just this absence of humility. While saying that they humble themselves, there is just no humility present, you know. So, verse 1 tells us, now this is the lesson in humility. Verse 1 tells us, What is the job of Moses in Midian? He is shepherding. What can you say about shepherding? Huh? What can you say about shepherding? What? It's less than being oppressed. Well, because you forgot Genesis already, okay? What can you say about shepherding in the context of Israel? Not prestigious. Let's look at Genesis chapter 46. Remember when Israel was about to go to Egypt? Now listen to this conversation in Genesis 46, starting on verse 33. When Pharaoh, Joseph was coaching his brothers. When Pharaoh addresses you and asks, "What is your occupation?" you are to say, "Your servants, both we and our ancestors, have raised livestock from our youth until now." Then you will be allowed to settle in the land of Goshen, since all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians. The reason why, remember, the reason why they were placed in Goshen is because being a shepherd is detestable to the Egyptians. Okay? So one of the first lessons that God taught him in humility, because Moses was raised to detest shepherding. He was raised as an Egyptian. So one of the first things that God showed him is, you cannot detest shepherding. He became a shepherd for 40 years. You see. What is the job that Filipinos detest the most? Anong trabaho yung ayon-ayon ng mga Pilipino? What? Farming. So we lost our agribusiness. Anything that is menial, yung wala sa opisina. Right? I mean, we look down on these things. Even being a maid. I grew up poor, but that is one of the jobs that is just, katulong lang yan. I know because my mother was one. And she used to do laundry for other people, and I will always be accompanying her. We look down. You know. Oh, katulong lang yan. That's how it is. And Moses grew up being taught in the palace of Pharaoh that being a shepherd is something that they detest. Now God told him, okay, this is the first thing that you're going to do. You're going to be a shepherd. So we have to be careful when we look down on other people. So shepherding, very detestable. God told him, that is going to be the job of your people when they go to the promised land. And so I want you to appreciate that and love that. And plus, of course, the fact that God is our shepherd. Now here are the valuable lessons that Moses need to learn. Okay, number one, your job does not determine your prosperity. I think, especially for the poor, we always think that our job determines our prosperity. God prospered Israel even if their job is the meanest job in Egypt. Being a shepherd is the least job that the Egyptians want. But God prospered them. I have seen this, for example, here in Chicago. When I first came here, if you go to I don't know what at Broadway, Piathoa, something like that. Yeah. Nadaanan pa namin yung the fish head is very cheap. Right? I mean, who eats that? The Americans say that. Who eats that? And now it's very expensive. Because the Filipinos, the Chinese, the Asians loves that. When I was growing up, kangkong, di ba yung kangkong napakamahal ngayon? Pagkain ng baboy yun eh. Yeah. Pagkain ng baboy yun. I know because I used to pick them from the farm. And my neighbors will laugh at us. They say, oh, they really have nothing. So, ngayon ang kangkong, napakamahal. Because the people who knows how to make money found out there's a lot of customers, so they make money out of it. But we Filipinos, we know that there are certain, sad to say, in our society, in the Philippines, we look down on the maids, We look down on the drivers. We look down on menial tasks. But if a person is wearing barong and then with tie, nag-uopisina yan. Mas mababa ang kita noon, walang pera yon. But because nakapostura, we say, well, I told you my father was a porter, but I found out in the 80s he was already making around at least 20,000 pesos per month. The guy was uneducated, but making good amount of money, of course, spending most of it drinking during that time. Moses needs to be one with his people. Again, your job should not be the source of your prosperity. God is the source of your prosperity. I told you about that school teacher that we had, original member of our church in Manila Bethel Temple. She was teaching at Arroyo High School, where Eddie Villanueva held his meetings. And she was making minimum amount of money. Lester Samuel started teaching on tithing. Actually, at first, Lester was not teaching tithing. And the Lord spoke to Lester and said, I want to prosper my people. And Lester said, Lord, these people are very poor. By the way, that's the reason also why his nephew, years later, David Samuel, taught prosperity. He told me why. He said he came to the Philippines and he looked at the poverty of the Filipinos. And he said, God, have mercy on these people. They are just poor. And God began to show him the message of prosperity. You see? And Lester said, Lord, of course I'm not teaching these people tithing. They are very poor. And God spoke to Lester and says, that's why I cannot prosper them. So he began to teach them. You give 10%. And there's this Arroyo school teacher that after teaching that, it's payday, she gave her whole month's salary, the paycheck, the government check. And Lester saw it, and she called the woman and says, I think you misunderstood, ma'am. I said 10%. This is the whole check. And she said, oh, Pastor, don't worry about it. God told me to give the whole check. And Lester said, okay. I just want to make sure you're provided for. I'm okay. The following month, she did the same thing. And she called the woman again and said, hey, listen, I told you only 10%. And she said, Pastor, it's none of your business. God told me to give this. She gave her whole check for the whole year. The moment the check is given, and so Lester called her, was very interested. Why did you do this? She said, God told me to do that. I know you said 10%, but ever since I followed God on that one, my kids prospered. He said, all my children are the ones providing for the family, for everything. All of her children prospered. And she became so rich as a person, not financially. This is what we say, the land cannot contain her. She moved to the U.S. and became very wealthy here. We have a member, I told you also, that she retired in a minimum job, went to New York, became a caretaker. After 1 year, the person she is taking care of died. And she was shocked. She was given $200,000. And she said, I'm not going to earn this. We have a member here before she no longer attends. I think she was given something like $1 million by her employee. Can you imagine that? Very faithful, but she gave $1 million. Anybody up here made $1 million already? Your job, and I hope you guys will get this in your spirit. Your job has got nothing to do with your prosperity. Now, these are shepherds, but they plundered Egypt. They went out of Egypt rich. Moses has to know that, because Moses grew up in the richest country on the face of the earth during that time. And so naturally, he is always thinking of dollars and cents in our current currency. And by the way, this is a mental block to all of us. most of us really think if we don't have the right promotion, the right job, we will not prosper. Because your faith is not in the God who prospers. Your prosperity is not dependent on your job. Your prosperity is based on the grace of God. You don't do God's will also using man's method. You need to use God's method. Again, 40 years. If it is man's method, Moses would learn military tactics. He would learn how to marshal people. My goodness, he left Egypt without supply, without provision. I mean, what they brought is what they brought. But come eating time, there was nothing. God has to rain manna. He has to learn God's provision. And you don't use man's methods to do God's will. You always use God's method. And this is when God says, my ways are higher than your ways. We stumble over this. And so now, after this initial teaching, of course, God meets Moses face to face. He saw the burning bush. This meeting with God, of God with Moses, is one of the most powerful meetings recorded in the scriptures between God and man. There was nothing like that ever that happened after that. Nothing at all like that. Can you imagine a burning bush? I don't know how that bush looks like. A lot of people make pictures out of it. They say that in that portion of Sinai, that there's a Horeb, there's a lot of bush like this. We really don't know. But it's a bush that is on fire, but it's not burning. And this becomes the catalyst. Moses looked at the burning bush and said, whoa, what is this? And he met God in Horeb, also known as the mountain of God, in this first encounter. So what are you going to see when you encounter God? In the first encounter, the first thing, God will introduce himself to you. The first thing, and don't forget this, in this first encounter, holiness is the first thing that Moses learned. You want to approach God, learn one thing. You're standing on holy ground. You see? And by the way, today that is already forgotten. People think that you can just simply approach God any way you want. He is still a holy God. So the first thing that Moses to learn, God is holy. He is not like the Egyptian gods that you can bribe or you can do sacrilegious things. He is the holy God. That's the first thing. The second lesson, by the way, that's why Moses took his sandals off his feet. The ground where you're standing is holy. You know, there's a lot of applications you can use of that. The miniature is the temple. The moment the temple is consecrated to God, not everybody can walk in. Can you imagine only certain number of priests can walk in the holy place? And then in the Holy of Holies, only one person can walk in, and that is the high priest. So that is all manifestations of the holiness of God. The second thing that he learned, number one, God is holy. The second thing that he learned, that God is faithful. Say, God is faithful. Immediately God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am the God of your fathers. I am faithful. I never forget. Now, it's a lesson that we will learn. The moment you meet with God, you will know that he is always faithful. He will never forget his promises to you. And God never forgets his promises to Israel. It's been 400 years since. 400 years they have been in Egypt. And God never forgets. He said, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. 400 years, 10 generations. And then God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember this, God is faithful. Whatever he promised to you, he will do. Next. Moses also learned, so number one, God is holy. Number two, God is faithful. Moses also learned that God is to be feared. The fear of God came to Moses in verse 6. He doesn't even want to look at God. And look at this. He hid his face. When was the first time we saw somebody hiding himself from God? Adam and Eve. You look at this. Different words, different Hebrew words were used, though. Okay, different Hebrew words were used. What Moses did was just conceal he saw God in a burning bush, he hid his face because of what he felt. What he felt was sorrow. I know he felt sorrowful, but this is the word that was used to conceal because of sorrow. Some people say godly sorrow. This is different from the use in reference to Adam and Eve hiding before God. Adam and Eve hid before God. The word that was used, they hide from God because they feel unfriendly to God. Okay? It's just like this. If somebody knocks on the door, he's a very good friend of yours, but your friend has been very good to you, loan you money, and never collect. And so you knock on the door and you want to hide. Because this guy has been very nice to you. At wala ka nang mukhang maiharap. The Philippine expression, wala kang mukhang maiharap dahil nahihiya ka. Out of gratitude. So you hide. But another thing, you hate somebody. And you are not friendly with the person. He knocks on the door and you did not answer. Because you are angry. That is the emotion that was displayed by Adam and Eve. After the fall, they felt unfriendly to God. And so they hid. Okay? Moses heard the message of God, which is also his call in verses 4 to 10. Now he had learned holiness, faithfulness, and the fear of God. The fear of God is something that has to return. I have been teaching you that. It has to return in our generation. It has to return, in fact, in our houses. The fear of God is no more. Remember the comment in Sodom and Gomorrah, the fear of God is not in this place. You know, the fear of God is not in this place. There are places wherein you cannot sense the fear of God at all. Lester Samuel said, if you're going to go to California, I think Southern California, do not go there unless God tells you. And he was asked why. He said, the fear of God is not there. And he said this also. One of the places that he said, you have to be called by God to go. He said, India. He said, it's an amazing thing. Now, he's an exorcist and is known as an authoritative person in casting out demons. He said, the moment you enter Indian airspace, he said, you will feel the weight of the demonic forces. And by the way, what's one of the main cities of India, Calcutta, India, is named after their major god, Kali. Yeah. And Lester had told stories of demonic encounters in India, wherein the demons will tell him, you will not get this country. This is mine. And missionaries have said this. The moment they fly out of India, and they are out of the airspace of India, they feel such weight leave them. Now, I have not been to India. I have no plans of going to India, you know, unless Brother Willie has been telling me, let's go to India. I said, you can go, you know. I don't think I'll go to that place unless God tells me. You know, I told you I have a classmate, he wanted me to go and minister in India and Pakistan and Bhutan. But I refuse, because unless God tells you to go there, that's a totally different area of ministry. The fear of God is not in these places. Now, as we deal with people today, recognize this. There's a lot of people in this country wherein the fear of God is not in them. You look at politics, a lot of these politicians have no fear of the Lord. A lot of the cities in America are beginning to lose the fear of God. You need to understand this, because if a person lost the fear of God, the devil can use that person freely. And so Moses to learn God is holy, God is faithful, and he has to be feared. God called Moses in verse 4 to 10. First of all, God called Moses by his name. God told Moses that he knew all that is happening to Israel and the oppression that they are experiencing in Egypt. Then he said that as a response, he will rescue Israel from the power of the Egyptian. And then he will bring them. I will rescue you. That's the first part. And then I will bring you to the land I promised to Abraham, Now Moses was, after God says, I will bring deliverance. And God told Moses, okay, Moses, you do it. By the way, this is how God does things. Whenever God wants to accomplish something, He always uses people on earth. Why? Because dominion was given to man already. This is our domain. That's why earth will be ruled by Jesus, God-man. Because the earth was given to man. It is the dominion of man. And by committing high treason, Satan took it from Adam. But God always looks for people whom He can use. And God says, I will bring deliverance. Moses, you go. That's why when we have a burden, and this is one of the ways you can test whether you have a vision or you have a call. People called by God, they develop this, for lack of a better term, burden. Their heart goes after certain things. That's normally an indication that God is creating a desire in a person to do something. Now, when God creates a desire in your heart, whatever it is, whatever ministry, when God puts a desire in your heart, nurture that. God will use you there. Okay? When God puts something in your heart, sometimes we are so lax on this one, we don't nurture it and we just let it go. No, God is the one who creates a desire, and so God will always use people. If you have a desire for ministry, nurture that, because most probably, if you are born again, God is the one creating that desire in your heart. And then, look at this. The country that God is bringing them is a spacious land. That's why we know that Israel has not occupied the whole of Israel, because it's not very spacious right now. But when God gives you something, it's sufficient for your needs. Then God set the boundaries of Israel for future generations to know. Again, another fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, because Moses got already introduced that God is faithful. Look at Genesis 15, verse 18. It's getting hot in here, right? Earlier it was cold and now it's hot. Genesis 15, verse 18. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, I give this land to your offspring from the brook of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates river, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Kadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. So this is the boundary that God put Israel in. Now, to fulfill His call, Moses was sent to confront Pharaoh. Now, this is, when you meet with God, people say, well, everything will be easy. That's easier said now. When you meet with God, God will tell you to confront things. Now, God didn't say, well, Moses, step aside. I think we like that expression. Step aside and watch the power of God. Well, remember that when God told Moses to step aside, remember when they were crossing the Red Sea? He first confronted Pharaoh. And then he looked at the back, the army, he's confronting the army of Pharaoh. He looked at the sides, he's confronting the mountainous terrain. And so there was already a confrontation. Sometimes we wish we can avoid this confrontation. But the enemy of our soul is very confrontational. So is God. You have to confront these things. You have to confront these things. And God says, I want you to go. Now, in the beginning, in chapter 2, Moses ran away from Egypt because of fear. He has to confront his fears. And I think a lot of us have a lot of fears that we fail to confront. If we fail to confront our fears, God will not be able to do His miracles. He will not be able to show us His hand, and we will not experience the power of God. And sometimes, really, when you begin to obey God, in the Philippines, we have a saying, pikit mata. When God called me to come to the U.S. to study, I don't know, I will pastor here. My pastor told me 3 years and then another 3 years. And then 1990 of December, I remember the date, December 16. God just spoke to me and said, you have stayed here long enough. I don't have the money. I don't have the visa. I don't have the school, although in my heart is Regent. And so when God told me that, that was 1 year earlier, rather, December 16, I submitted my resignation letter. I said, December 16, 1990, I said, 2 weeks notice. Effective January 1st, I'm out, you know. And they said I was crazy. But I have to confront that. If I did not confront that and I become smart, you know, look for sponsors. Now, by the way, you have to make sure that God speaks to you. I may not have been able to make it here, you know. I know if my wife will marry me because she said I was not husband material in the Philippines. Then I would have missed my kids with her. But I have to confront that. Now, I wish I can tell you that it's easy, but it's not. Because you are looking at a mountain, you are looking at a giant, and God will tell you, confront that. But you have Moses, an ordinary citizen, a fugitive of the law, confronting the most powerful person on earth during that time. A fugitive confronting, Pharaoh could have killed Moses right there, but the protection of God is there. You have to confront your fears. If you don't confront your fears, you're not gonna go anywhere. Nahihiya ako, natatakot ako. Well, you cannot do that. Moses, the preparation of Moses was 40 years. You know, don't rush things. I think a lot of people rush things that they come ill-prepared. Although God is leading us, it doesn't mean that God will not prepare us. Now, to wash his head, to cleanse him, 40 years. God also was responding to the prayers of Israel. Now, a Pharaoh who doesn't know, Joseph rose and began to oppress the people. Now, I don't know how long it was, but that generation was the oppressed generation. Some people say it's more than one generation. I'm not convinced of that. I think that generation. And so he rose up, and he was afraid, and so he began to oppress Israel. When they prayed for years, God started listening. And God says, I am paying a careful attention. So assuming that that generation experienced the oppression of Pharaoh, then their natural tendency is to pray. And God started listening. Well, nothing happened until Moses was born. When Moses was born, that was God's answer to their prayer. So, God answered, assuming God answered when Moses was born, 40 years before Moses killed the Egyptian. Another 40 years, he was in the wilderness of Midian. 80 years. Which means some of the generations who were enslaved died already. It is now their children who are enslaved. Right? And that is when they got out. Now this is a great task, a great endeavor, the birthing of a nation. God did not just snap his finger and they went out. Israel, and we will see this in our next lessons, God has to show them what Egypt is. Israel has to see it, their eyes has to be open to this. Because when you face the world, and you will not appreciate the deliverance, okay? When God delivered Israel, the Bible says, from what word, God delivered him from the misery of Egypt. Question, what is the misery of Egypt? It was not just an exodus. God was bringing them out from the misery of Egypt. I was thinking about this. What is the misery of Egypt? You see, you come to Hong Kong as a Filipino, you're a maid. You don't even have a room. There's a misery of Hong Kong, but there's a misery of Egypt. Everything that Egypt represents brings misery. Their wealth, their idolatry. You know, from the outside, it looks luxurious and it looks progressive. but it's full of misery. For example, ill-gotten wealth brings misery. Now, this is when God says, I will bring you out of Egypt, from the misery of Egypt. You know what attracts us the most sometimes are the ones that makes us most miserable. Yeah. Now, I don't know what misery is God delivered us from, or God needs to deliver us from. But very specific in the passage we read, God will bring them out from the miseries of Egypt. Well, what they did is they bring some of their misery with them, like idolatry. You see, when God rescued us from remember Galatians, when God rescued us from the present evil world to the kingdom of His dear Son, because the world is a miserable place. What the world offers to us is miserable. It's misery. Egypt is a picture of life of sin. It's misery. If we think that what sin offers will make you happy, well, that's going to make me happy. No, it will bring misery to you. And so, God, in responding to the prayers of Israel, has to take into consideration the other things that Israel has not considered. For example, if you are suffering from poverty and you say, Lord, deliver me from this poverty, all you're thinking is deliverance from poverty. But there are other things that God will consider. For example, the danger of wealth possessing you instead of you possessing wealth. And so there's a lot of training that a person needs to go through in order for him to possess the promised land. If we don't pass the training, we will not make it to the promised land. The generation that left Egypt did not make it to the promised land. They did not pass the training. You see? They did not pass the training. The moment you don't pass the training, you are not equipped to enter the promised land. How long? I do not know. I preached a sermon over 20 years ago. It was in the old church. And I realized, I said, man, ever since I got born again, I have been training and training and training. You know, when I became a senior pastor, I think after being in the ministry for 17 years, yeah, after being in the ministry for 17 years, I've been an associate, I've been a deacon, I've been a youth minister, I have pioneered a couple of churches back home. Came here, studied, 17 years. And then finally I became a senior pastor. And sometimes I often wonder, Lord, why so long? I have seen people that became pastor overnight. I say, why so long? Well, I never had the answer, but I think that's the training I need. You see? Do not rush. Do not rush your promised land. God will put you through training. Your promised land will be God's promises to you. It's your victorious Christian life. If you don't prepare yourself, if you don't meet the deliverer, if you don't meet the God of Moses that Moses met, you may not be successful in handling it. If you're not successful, you will just lose it. You will just lose it. So the generation left Egypt, right? What happened? What was their complaint to Moses? Well, is there not enough cemetery, burial place in Egypt that God took us out to kill us here? Guess what happened to them? They were buried in the wilderness. The thing that they feared the most happened to them. You cannot approach life in fear. The only fear that we need to have is the fear of God, but you cannot approach life fearful. Because what you fear the most can happen to you. And so they were complaining to God, Lord, are we just going to eat manna and quails all the days of our lives? That's exactly what they ate. Oh Lord, we miss the cucumbers and onions and garlic. They keep missing it to the day they die. Everything that they were afraid, they suffered. And so let's get rid of this fear. Remember, God is holy. Number two, God is faithful, and He is to be feared. Amen? Learn something tonight? Let's all stand. Praise God.